Welcome back to English Unplugged with Britt Roy and Nick B. Ponter, a show where two English trainers share practical tips on how you can improve your English communication skills. Before we get started, I'd just like to remind you to like, share, and subscribe this video so that we can grow our channels and other learners like you can profit from the tips that we give. Let's introduce ourselves again, Nick, to all the new audience members. Would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself and our last episode of English Unplugged?
Sure. Thank you very much for the thank you very much, Brit. The words aren't coming out properly. Thank you very much for the introduction. My name is Nick Ponter. I'm a business English trainer, and I live and work in the Bielefeld area. Yes, it does exist, if people doubt it. And not only am I a business English trainer, I'm also a published fantasy author. I love traveling, and I love communicating with people. And basically, the last Unplugged we did on Big Talk was about pronunciation. And of course, the main thing which we wanted to talk about was it doesn't have to be perfect, which links in nicely to today's subject. And of course, you can listen to everything we actually do on Spotify. You can listen and watch. So it's really good. Britt, over to you.
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, you really are an incredible person. You've done so much, and I'm so looking forward to your second book coming out very soon. My name is Britt Broy. I'm a corporate English trainer in the Rhine-Main area of central Germany. I'm also an adjunct lecturer at the University of Applied Sciences in Mainz. And I'm a busy mom. I have two kids. I love art and culture and some good food. And yeah, I love making this podcast with my colleague, Nick.
So let's get going, Britt. Can you remind me what's the subject of today's video? I've forgotten.
Well, the subject of our episode today is fluency or communication versus accuracy. Like you mentioned in the introduction, it really does tie back to our previous episode, which was on pronunciation. And the fact of the matter is that most people take lessons or work with trainers because they want to improve. They want to be perfect. And I have to admit, I am myself a perfectionist, and it is actually completely counterproductive to doing anything better because it cripples you. So, Nick, when you hear the phrase communication versus accuracy, what does it mean to you?
Well, basically, I mean, having the confidence to communicate without being restricted by the thought of grammatical correctness. I mean, I think everybody is in fear of making mistakes. Probably goes back to their school days with red pen and wrong, wrong, wrong. But making mistakes is normal. You can't ride a bicycle without falling off it. And language is exactly the same. And everyone makes mistakes. It's absolutely okay to make mistakes. Native speakers, we Brit, we also make mistakes. And if we do that, how can we expect people not to do the same? And I think that this is really what I mean by communication against accuracy. The communication should be the stronger half of this equation. And we should not measure our language only in terms of grammatical accuracy. There are many other ways, for example, of achieving a task, regardless of whether it's 100% accurately spoken. So what about you, But do you agree with my take on that?
I do. I really do. And I like to remind my students that, if you are speaking to a native speaker, most native speakers are not English teachers or English trainers. So they won't hear that you've made a mistake. There might be something off, but they couldn't quite put their finger on it. And 98% of the time, they will know exactly what you mean in what you've said, even if you've made a mistake. So there's so much more to communicating easily than just speaking perfectly, grammatically correctly. Um, it's all about, I think, the context of the conversation and the content. And there's so much that is decided by the vocabulary you use. There are nonverbal ways of communicating. So, body language, facial expressions, those things can express meaning as well. So, even if you make a mistake on a verb tense, it's not a deal breaker. It's not a deal breaker. Language should really just give us the ability to communicate with each other and get our points across and not hold us back because we're afraid of making mistakes. And this is also true for most of our viewers. They will be speaking with non native speakers who are also going to make mistakes. So I think the big key takeaway for me is everybody just needs to lower their bar a little bit if they want to gain confidence and thereby improve their communication skills.
Hey, thank you, Britt. That's a very comprehensive answer, and I agree completely with you, especially on the last point about being non-native to non-native. Most of the people I teach in companies don't really communicate with native speakers, like from the US or from England, South Africa, Australia. A lot of it's Eastern European, Asia, and they're not native speakers themselves. Both sides make mistakes, and I think it's more important that they actually achieve what they're trying to do. For example, where's my shipment, or what's happening with the production order. And I think, as you say, the context comes with the vocabulary. And when you're speaking, you don't really have time to think about the grammar. I always think that if people aspire to have correct grammar, which is okay, it's a very good aspiration to have. It's more of the natural side of the language, and you would probably, if you want to get it really perfect, have to live and work in a native speaking country for a while. And it's, as most of the people watching this will probably, be maybe not in a native speaking English country, that's not an achievable task. So both sides can make mistakes. The biggest hang up which people get when I teach people in companies is, I don't know the tenses. Can we practice the tenses? Oof, we've got lots of them in English, absolutely lots of them. But don't worry, everyone out there. Those German speakers watching, I have problems with der, die, das, dem, des. So don't worry, I don't get it correct either. Tenses, we can practice it, of course, but you don't have to always get it correct. What's important is the vocabulary, because you can get the wrong tense, okay, but get the right vocabulary. So, Britt, grammatical correctness, what's your take on that?
Well, I do believe that it's okay to cover grammar and review grammar in lessons if they are relevant to the context in which they're needed. So this applies to the corporate world as well as everyday conversation. When I am teaching in my IT company, for example, um, I teach a lot of language for meetings and phrases and vocabulary that will be used in meetings. Um, the vocabulary is really the most important part. When we come across something that is relevant to a specific context, let's say making a promise to a customer or um, following up and saying what will be done by whom as an action item at the end of the meeting, then you can review in that moment applicable verb tenses, for example, that will help them fulfill that task in their jobs. It doesn't make any sense for people to learn vocabulary that's not relevant for the context in which they absolutely need it. So I think it's really important to focus on what is needed in a specific context, master that, and go on to the next thing. It really all depends on which area you use English most. If you're giving presentations, giving sales pitches, if you're writing academic papers, there's a certain set of vocabulary that's absolutely necessary for each one of those areas. So that's what needs to be focused on. What's your take?
Yeah, I completely agree. It really does depend on the context, the subject content, and then we as trainers can focus really on the task at hand rather than being picky on grammar. So we can be a little bit more relaxed, which makes, I believe, the lesson more relaxed and motivates or urges people to speak. For example, if you've got I teach a lot of logistic companies, and people are calling about where's my shipment, or there's a problem, there's a delay, and it really is correct in my belief to focus on these words, exactly as what you're talking about, and then be slightly relaxed on the grammar. If we were to be over strict on grammar, people would stop talking. They would think, oh, I'm going to make mistakes. So yeah, I believe vocabulary over grammar is another term we could use, is also very, very important. I'm obviously not saying that we should be so relaxed that we shouldn't help or correct people. Of course we should. But I think it's getting the right balance, which is important.
Right. Okay, Nick, so tell us, how do you train students regarding communication and accuracy?
Well, this is really good, this part, because it's something I particularly like, storytelling. I am a storyteller, being a published author, but storytelling is how I approach my lessons. All of my students will know how I begin. So tell me, what did you do this week at work? Tell me about something. Sometimes I get, oh, same as last week. No, I'm not going to accept that. So I get people to tell me about their jobs, and I delve in with more questions. By doing that, people are talking and telling you about real things. They're increasing their vocabulary. If they don't know it, we try to get it together as a group. So this is really communication, not accuracy. It increases confidence a lot by talking freely about their work, especially when they've got the vocabulary to back it up, or even better, alternative vocabulary choices once they get to a more advanced stage. And as they're talking freely and not in pre-prepared grammatical gap-filled sentences, they get a better language feeling. And everybody in my lessons talk to each other in English. So then they get used to speaking in front of people as well. And basically, the thing is, ask a question, can I, as the student, do my job in the English language? And it's more than just storytelling, than just like, what did you do at work? If I'm in a company, I teach a lot of technical English or products. And like, hey, let's get the products on the table. Let's look at the technical drawings. Let's go to the production. And that's where storytelling really comes in. And people, I find, once they get used to this style of training, they relax naturally and don't think about the grammar, and it just comes out freely. And very often, in my opinion, people often get the grammar correct without knowing about it. And as soon as I start presenting them with grammatical gap fill exercises, they get it wrong. So overthinking a subject can actually have negative consequences, I believe. So Britt, what about you? Do you do it the same as me? Similar? Different?
Yeah, I completely agree. And I do think getting students to speak freely about what they did on the weekend, what they've got going at work in the following days after the lesson, really, so it makes the language real, and it's very applicable and relevant to that particular person's life. And if there isn't a direct relevancy between what is being taught and practiced in a training session, they won't retain any of the information. So I have had the exact same experience. If you give a student an exercise on paper, they freeze up and they can't remember the right answer. But if you get them to start speaking freely about something that is important to them or something that interests them, they speak just fine and with very few errors. So I think the main thing is to provide as many opportunities as possible within the training situation to practice the language in a context specific and personally relevant way. So, and the more that a person practices, the more their confidence grows, and the easier they will, the easier time they'll have in communication. So, it's interesting though, you did mention the gap fill. So how do you cover grammar?
That's a very interesting question. I do sometimes teach it in the more traditional way when I think it's necessary, and sometimes as a small part of the lesson, not the main part of the lesson, because you do get some people who believe it has to be in a lesson still. Maybe it goes back to their school days, maybe especially in the lower groups, and some people actually like it. So I do it sometimes with gap fill, often just as a reminder for people from what they've done before. So I don't want to undertalk the importance of grammar in our speech, in our talk today, certainly not, but it's getting the weight correct. My favorite style is actually correcting as you go along. And if somebody makes a mistake, I'll wait for an opportune moment. I don't give the correct answer. I say, you said something. It's understandable, but we could say it differently. So I always like to look at the positives. And then I ask the group or the person if they could think of another way of doing it. And very often the answer comes quite quickly. And often I don't have to reteach the grammar. I don't have to explain the present continuous again or the past simple. That's not necessary. Most people remember it from their school days. They just need a prompt and a reminder. So my favorite tactic is correcting as we go along. As a small part of some lessons, I do go to gap fill, and I also have my own e-learning program for those who really want to practice grammar to do it in there just before they go to bed. Of course, is what everybody's going to do. So,
Right.
do you do it the same as me, Britt?
Well, very, very similar. I don't have a fancy app. I work with some tried and true textbooks when students request written exercises. And the way that I was taught in my teacher training to work with any point, whether it be grammar, vocabulary, functional language, cultural things, is the 3 Ps. So it's present, practice, and perform. And depending on the needs of a particular group or a particular student, I adjust this to make it contextually relevant to that group or that person. So it's very similar actually to how small children learn their native language. And mums don't teach their kids, they don't open a book after breakfast and say, today we're going to practice, countable and uncountable nouns. No, mommy repeats the correct answer. And so oftentimes, because I also speak exclusively English in my lessons, full immersion is the way that's always worked best for me. And I feel like that's how learners learn best. To recreate the experience of being in that country where the language is spoken. But what I do is I correct as we go along, simply by repeating the correct answer after someone has made a mistake. I don't say, stop, you're wrong. I prompt them, or if they're a little bit more advanced, we've done a review, all I have to do is give them a little look, and then they know exactly, oh, no, it is present continuous, or it's present perfect, or something like that. So I have little tricks the way that I do it, but it should be comfortable, it should be natural, and it by no means demotivating. It should not be demotivating. So I try to focus on a more practical approach and a very natural and communicative approach, even with grammar.
I would agree. I have to mention something that in most of my lessons, when I ask somebody a question, very often the answer is, I know it's wrong, but. And this is something for me which probably comes from, I don't want to criticize any school system. I mean, we live in a luxury where we have schools, so that's fine. But of course, schools have to measure language. And one of the best ways of doing it is in standardized tests, often grammar. I get it completely. This is where this I know it's wrong, but comes from, I believe. However, Britt, you and I, and all the trainers who we work with, we don't teach in schools. And we have a completely different mindset, and we have a completely different skill set and completely different customers. So something which I always say, especially with new groups, apprentices, especially this time of the year, you've learned it in school, now let's use it. And that's something which I like to remind people all the time. So, Britt, another question for you. In your opinion, what are good communication skills?
Oh, this is a difficult question, and I think we could even come up with some new topics for further episodes
I'm
on
sure.
good communication skills. Obviously, there are technical communication skills like use of vocabulary, um, the amount of verb tenses that you can command. But also, I think as you develop in your skills, the level of formality that is to be used is also a big communication skill, because later on in life, it's not just about buying a train ticket or asking for directions or something like that. A lot of the people that we teach, they run social media platforms, they negotiate contracts, they um, have customer events and things like that. And, the type of language that you would use on social media varies vastly from the language that would be used to set out a contract, right? And the language that you would use when you are networking with potential clients and customers is also a different set. So formality or register is one of those things that belongs to good customer or good communication skills. Just knowing who is your audience and how do you communicate appropriately for that audience. Um, Cultural skills are also a communication skill, and that's something that we could talk about in another episode, intercultural communication. Um, but the main thing is really, it's not just a skill. I think the biggest skill any learner can have is confidence, even
Yeah,
though it's not really a skill, but the stronger your confidence is, the better you will communicate. What do you think?
completely. And confidence is, yeah, kind of a skill. It's feeling. And feeling you can only get by doing something naturally. And we as trainers have to try to give that natural feeling in a lesson. So we've mentioned, both of us have mentioned the words a few times, positive experiences, negative experience. We all know that if you overcorrect grammar, it will cause a negative effect. And you will have the people then saying, I know it's wrong, but. And if people are already thinking that before they've opened their mouths, then they're not going to communicate very well. Because I can only reiterate it again. People are scared of making mistakes. We have to try to take that away from them, and then they become scared of speaking if you can't take that away from them. So, yeah, these key words, being positive, being negative, very important, and that's really got a lot to do with what we're talking about today: communication against accuracy.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Okay, Nick. So we're drawing to a close. We've had a really great discussion about what's more important, accuracy or fluency, communication skills. What concrete tips can we give the audience today about strengthening their fluency or their communication skills?
Okay, well, we've got 5 quick tips for you. I'm going to go straight into the first one. Number one, you are allowed to make mistakes. It's okay. No problem.
I think I'm going to replay that clip for myself on a daily basis. Thank you, Nick.
You're welcome.
Okay, our second tip is please don't think about the grammar while you are speaking. Think about the message that you want to get across. It's totally fine to think about grammar. Do it while you are reading or listening. That's when you can observe the grammar and think about the grammar. But if you're thinking about which grammar to use while you're speaking, it will stop you dead in your tracks. You'll stutter. You'll forget what you want to say in the first place. And then you'll get very, very insecure mid conversation. We don't recommend it. So don't think about grammar while you're speaking.
And tip number 3, most communication I think the listeners will have today will be non-native to non-native speaker. So if you are not a native speaker, that's absolutely fine. Focus on achieving your task. having the correct vocabulary. Maybe practice it before. And as Britt just said, don't think about the grammar. So non-native to non-native. Tip number one, don't be scared of making mistakes. It's okay. They all come together.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. And then I think the fourth tip that we could give our listeners or our audience today is to learn as much vocabulary, especially about contexts that are relevant to your life. So if you work in real estate development, you should watch videos, read blogs, read magazines about real estate development in English so that you can learn the words that are necessary to talk about that. If you like Japanese koi ponds, then read, learn, listen about vocabulary related about koi ponds, for example. But it has to be relevant. There has to be an interest in it. If you would like some more tips about how to do that, please go back and watch our video on everyday ways to improve your English. We talk about a lot of ways to incorporate your interests and learning English into your everyday life. Right, Nick?
I completely agree. And that is our last and final tip. By doing what Britt just said is completely correct, refer to our past videos and get the nice language feeling. Not from grammar books, not from gap fills. Do something you're interested in. Watch something in English on the television. Listen to an English podcast and do it something which you're interested in. This is a natural feeling, and language has always been natural. So we shouldn't split it up into little mathematical parts. And that, Britt, I would say, are our 5 tips.
Great, Nick. Thank you. All right, Nick. Well, that was English Unplugged for today. Thanks, everybody, for watching. Tell us a little bit about what's going to be the topic of the next episode, Nick.
Next episode, right, I would say, is it still relevant to practice writing emails? Okay, you don't write it with a pen, but you know what I mean. Writing emails. In the world of internet digital tools and AI, is it still relevant today? That's my question.
Yeah, I think this is a really, really important topic. I actually teach writing at the university at the master's level. This is a very, very interesting topic, and it's a subject that I speak to all of my students about on a regular basis. And we'll just look at these questions and see how learners can actually use these tools to help them improve their skills rather than make it unnecessary for them to have the skills in the first place.
Okay, so as you can see, Britt and I are very passionate about what we do, and we love making this content to you and the next one as well. But in the meantime, please help us grow. Please like, follow, subscribe, do anything you want, and help us with our algorithms and just basically content feed. If you have any comments, write to us. Forward our stuff. We're open to any questions.
Right, right. And we are both on different social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube. So if you would like to stay in touch with us, it's so that you don't miss another episode, or you want to see what else we're doing out there in the digital world, please follow us there. All of our information is in the description box below. And at this point, I will just say thank you, Nick, and thank you to all of our viewers. We absolutely do love doing this. It's always so much fun to work with you, Nick. I really enjoy it.
Likewise, Britt, and thank you very much as well for talking to you about this very important subject today, something very close to my heart, this one particularly today. So great talk today, and I look forward to the next one, Britt.
So do I, Nick. Take care. See you next time.
See you. Bye-bye to everyone watching.
Bye, everyone.